Ma'am from NACAM. Focus to the chairperson. Focus to the chairperson. You out with the presentation. All those that are going to make presentations must hand them over to Walter for uploading. We are going to move hawkers or class public. Okay, you may please come forward. Remember, switch on the mic, please. Please state your name and your designation at
Person of public interest. Okay, while it's
No, why don't we?
Thank you, Chair. I'm ready. At least for once, ESCOM cannot be blamed for what just happened. You see reflecting on the screen in the allotted time frame. But if I don't, I'm sure the documents will be made available via NERSA. What we're seeking to do, basically, our presentation is very soft, it's not technical. We're just basically talking about integrity, the whole supply chain and the price application that ESCOM has requested of NERSA. So, on three pillars, the first one being the impact on tariffs on both small businesses and households, transparency and accountability from all the players, as well as touch that are not necessarily intrinsic to the production of energy. So that's and without much ado, let me go straight to the first pillar. Not so long ago, and all of us know what the situation is in regards to the small business environment. And never mind, even after that, we also know the effects of the September, the uprising, both in KZN and here. So small businesses are really in a very tight space. And whatever increases that they may well have to face, in this instance, electricity and energy, and it does not make for a better environment for small businesses, especially if they have to also compete with larger entities who seem to have or to enjoy better tariffs, preferential treatment from ESCOM. And as we are wont to hear from time to time, small business at the heart of the economy, or so we believe, or we're meant to believe, but very little seems to be taken to actually adverse price increases such as the one that we see. Now, things that we've identified and we would like to really have NERSA and ESCOM to consider, which seems to favor bigger players. Here it could be smelters or other manufacturers of steel through the negotiated price agreement. Environment for small business to actually be competitive, not only locally but also globally, especially for those who aspire to sell their goods from fabrication. And energy is at the core of all of that. And the last part of this has to do with the situation where we find with the economic situation, both in the household, where the financial strain. I've had a lot of presenters ahead of us who have already stated or shown how much impact it has, the inflation has had on the ordinary people, and how actually further increases of energy or electricity prices would actually make a worse situation even worse. So, if you look at the figures that we've drawn from one of the reputable entity, we've seen since 2007, there's an average of a combined cumulative 650, over 650% increase on energy costs, which you can imagine with the wages not going up, it just makes less and less of what is available, disposable income get to be spent on things such as energy. So an adverse increase on energy will certainly hit the households very high, especially in an environment where there's high unemployment such as we encounter. I've already mentioned the NPAs. What we really call for is for transparency more than anything else. We would implore that agreements such as the one that ESCOM has with Hillside Smelters get to be the details of the pricing get to be shared publicly, so that the public get to know what it is that the actually agreements entail, and any justification that actually attaches to that, whether it's economic or otherwise, so that people can be able to engage with them and see whether we are getting value for money as a sovereign, because most of the finished products, as I understand, actually with regards to Hillside, get to be exported, and we don't get to benefit from the cheap electricity prices generated and used for the production of such. But one other key thing that we also are alive to, or would like NERSA to actually be alive to, is the issue of ethical sourcing. I've heard Caleb earlier talk about carbon tax implications. What we really are asking for is that we need a bit more transparency in terms of reporting the deferred carbon taxes liabilities, to ensure that as you factor in future price increases, we get to know how transparent the entity has been with regards to carbon tax pricing. Currently, that is still, I wouldn't like to say smoke and mirrors, but it's still unclear. But also part of ethical sourcing is also the rule of law. We've had instances where the Supreme Court, I think it's 2017 or thereabout, they made, in regards to the openness or transparency that they seek of ESCOM. And to date, what has been, society has just been met with absolute disregard or no interest at all, by way of making sure that when courts make pronouncement, ESCOM itself also get to be seen to be living, to be abiding by such rulings. Much as we as public interest would also advocate for individuals, businesses and others to make sure that they stick up to their commitments to ESCOM, we would expect the same of ESCOM to ensure that it observes and respects and implements court orders, unless of course they are being appealed or otherwise. The last part is where we talk about the cost-effective recoveries. Here we're basically saying corruption is at the heart of price increases, or yes. In most instances, you find that the utility would be paying much more for the same item that they actually procure less elsewhere. We've had instances of gloves or kneecaps being brought at inflationary costs, and we're saying those costs somehow got to be borne by the consumer, and they actually find their way to incur. And if ESCOM does a lot more insofar as dealing with endemic corruption within the supply chain, that could go a lot much better to ensure that such costs actually get to be alleviated. In fact, if you take, for example, what the norm has been, there's always an assumption, that environment, for example, goes to is lost to corruption. If you take, for instance, ESCOM's 720 billion spent for the financial years 2020 to 2024, that accounts to about 36 billion rands, not 36 rands, 36 billion rands that has been lost. That could actually go a long way to alleviate some of the costs in terms of cost recoveries that ESCOM ought to be defraying. So, what we do wish or recommend is to ensure that there's equity insofar as tariff setting by ESCOM, making sure that everybody is treated equally, small businesses and big business. We understand that those who purchase in bulk can actually enjoy the benefits of discount because there's a commitment that they make to the utility to generate a certain minimum amount of energy, which is fine. But transparency would actually go a long way to enhancing, to making sure that society, or especially small businesses, get to be treated fairly insofar as their energy use or consumption. And the issue of transparency, again, we see it permeate throughout. And what we're saying is that Eskom needs to actually even demand of some of its customers. Here I'm talking about the bulk energy users, like municipalities, especially municipalities, where we believe that municipalities seem to be treated with kid gloves, and yet consumers, ordinary consumers, don't seem to be. And that has got a deleterious effect on individual perception insofar as their obligations to Eskom if other people or entities are treated differently. A case in point is the city of Joburg, who had committed to pay a certain amount to Eskom within days, a couple of weeks ago, and they basically defaulted. Yes, they were given an agreed deferment, but even when they did settle yesterday, they paid yesterday the amount, it was still far less. What really appreciative of the fact that Eskom is transparent insofar as its procurement and contracts that it already has in place or is seeking to conclude. But what we need to be able to also see is the amount of procurement events that have been flagged either as suspect or as corrupt and as being investigated or otherwise. And if that value can also be quantified, so you can see how much of that amount has actually been, savings have been clawed back and be reflected somehow in Eskom, through Eskom reporting requirements. That would be something that could also create some trust into the system. But more importantly, the issue of revenue collection still is at the heart of Eskom. You can generate the best energy, but if you not make sure that you actually collect it, it just means not very much, because your sustainability depends a lot more on your ability to recover. And one of the key things that we are also going to be proposing, maybe in future, is to ensure that those bulk users becomes part of the agreement that they actually install metering systems on their end, which don't create the kind of problem that we are faced with Joburg now, the matter being taken over to Sanedi to actually resolve. Something that we clearly know that Eskom is not being on the wrong, but the city is just kicking the can down the road. So, having said that, the last part that I would like to leave with is the issue of future-proofing demand. And by that, we simply mean that there's a likelihood, or there's a movement, or rather a clamor for increased free basic electricity from the current 50 kilowatt hour. And should that happen in the coming years, especially while this price increase is in place, what would Eskom be able to mitigate such price increases? Because as we know that the current dispensation has been in place since 2003 or thereabouts, and society has changed, demand for consumption, I'm talking individual household, has multiplied many times. So Eskom needs to be able to factor that so it doesn't get to be caught napping should the legislature or those responsible for setting policy actually change and come back and say we are increasing. Sum total of what we had to share with you today. While we recognize the importance and the difficult economic conditions facing South Africans and the competing priorities in energy pricing, we remain neutral on the percentage increase proposed for a reason that technically we wouldn't be able to offer you any number that we believe could be acceptable. But we're saying to Eskom and to NERSA, please take consideration of the effect of the economic conditions that both household and small businesses find themselves in, to make sure that whatever increases, should that be granted, does not serve a death knell to our economy, and especially the vulnerable and the poor. I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, presentation. Just one question from my side. In terms of one of your reporting, you've got 1 minute. No, you still have 1 minute.
And I'll give you 10 minutes.
I know. I'm controlling the clock here. The transparency around NPAs, the negotiated pricing agreements, and you are suggesting that cost-benefit analysis be done on these negotiated agreements. I know that this is a question that we posed to Eskom in PE. They still haven't come back on that with regards to the impact of the NPAs after they have been approved. However, I just want to check with you whether you will still be fined if, for instance, there's an assessment and the finding that even if there's a cost to the consumer, other consumers on NPAs, but if you look at the impact in terms of volumes, especially for those the companies that were on the verge of closing down, and then they look at the total sales that they would have lost if they did not agree to the prices, and they also talk about social issues, socio-economic issues, would you still believe that the NPAs is something that we need to go ahead with, even if it means a cost? Like right now, there is a cost of 5.7% hitting back on consumers because of the NPAs. It means consumers, in as much as they say, save the companies. So when you say save these companies to produce, but also it means consumers now are paying the shortfall. So would you say that we still need to go ahead?
I would still say there's a need for a review. Analysis of the cost benefit, and I hear the points that you're making, but if you look at it look at it this way, when those companies actually benefit from the increased aluminium prices in the global markets, for example, Eskom doesn't get the upside, so don't we as consumers get to benefit from that? So basically, they have been to the economy, that will make a huge dent. I think if you look at this instead, you could talk about maximum about 7,000, or I can't remember the actual numbers, but the amount of jobs that you're actually talking about is not quite significant. Yes, NUMSA will argue with me and say, no, look, those jobs need to be protected at all costs. But I'm saying, yes, certainly has need to come to the table, because at the end of the day, we need equity in the system.
Because then it means the 5.7% that we see now on the NPAs, and what about the cost now that is hitting the ordinary consumers? Thank you very much for your time. All right, it seems NUMSA has a task here. We now going to NAA Camp, Nakam. Okay, in the meantime, you can switch on the mic. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you're
I do.
Thank you.
I'm Beth Daltrey. I'm the head of policy and allied manufacturers.
Thank you very much. You may start with your.
But just so members in the audience and the panel is aware, NARCAM is the industry association, effectively a trade association representing specifically component manufacturers